Alrighty, and here we come to part two, looking at the short-term causes of the Chinese Civil War. And you've seen these before. Basically, everything that we're talking about now is helping to understand how these different things interacted, how these different events interacted with each other and with the long-term causes to bring about the Civil War. And then, of course, they're going to help compare and contrast with the Spanish Civil War as a form of review and essay practice. One of the short-term causes of the Chinese Civil War is the Treaty of Versailles. That treaty had repercussions all over the world. We've spoken about repercussions in the former German colonies and in Europe, etc. But it acts as a catalyst in China. And so we have the May 4th movement of 1919, and I'm assuming you figured out that it really began on May 4th, 1919. Yeah. BTW, the previous slide, that was a map of the Guomindang flag. Yes. Basically, the May 4th movement was over the Treaty of Versailles and the undermining of China's sovereignty. And so there were massive demonstrations in China over the Versailles Treaty. China had joined World War I, as other states had as well, for what she could get out of it. And what she was hoping to get out of it was reclaiming of some of those German concessions and the treaties, the nullification of the treaties that Germany had forced upon her. But the Treaty of Versailles, the Paris Peace Conference, and we've spoken about this before as to some of the real difficulties that came up. Essentially, they thought that Wilson had their back, because this is all about self-determination and national sovereignty. And heck, tens of thousands of people went and helped out in World War I, and many of them died. But it turns out that the major ally that they thought they had in the U.S. was not to be. In essence, Japan used the U.S.'s inability to support her racial equality treaty to force to allow her to hold the German stuff that she basically had. So at this point, the Treaty of Versailles makes China angry, and it also makes Japan angry. So this has really big consequences for both the Chinese Civil War as well as World War II in Asia. One of the things that this does, though, and the May 4th movement does, is it revives the fortunes of the Guomindang. When Yuan Shikai took over, they were banned. And then after Yuan Shikai died, they had a lot of difficulty sort of reestablishing themselves. And with this massive amount of nationalism that comes out as part of the Treaty of Versailles, or as part of the negative reactions to the Treaty of Versailles, many people are looking in the direction of the GMD to lead the country and to, as a repository of their nationalism and as a group that would get some of that done, reestablish more autonomy and sovereignty for China. The other thing is this May 4th movement actually sets the groundwork for the Chinese Communist Party. And this is really one of the big reasons why we say that this is a short-term cause of the war. Because in essence, you have a lot of people who are politicized and angry, and they're looking for solutions to the problems that China is facing. One path is the GMD, and another path is the CCP. both the GMD and the CCP have really strong elements of nationalism in them. But ultimately, the direction that they follow and the ideology that they follow is different. This is also one of the reasons why Sun Yat-sen, because of his nationalism and attempting to establish the Republic of China, is seen as the godfather or the founder of both the GMD and the CCP.
In May 1919, for the first time, Chinese took to the streets to protest this dividing up of their country. They saw that the problems of imperialism and warlords had pushed China to the verge of collapse. The demonstration sparked a vocal nationalism and an intense search for political solutions. One of the few political leaders addressing these problems was Sun Yat-sen. Sun was the leader of a coalition group called the Nationalist Party. He was a charismatic man whose speeches attracted many to his cause.
And as the previous video clip showed you, the nationalist ideas that Sun Yat-sen was putting forth. But in addition to that, as stated previously, we have the development of the Chinese Communist Party. And that in and of itself is a short-term cause of the war, because, if they didn't exist, then blah, blah, blah. You got this. In terms of the CCP, many of the founding members of the Chinese Communist Party had been heavily involved in the May 4th movement. And so this was kind of like these protests and this movement, this attempt at, sort of like pushing back against the imperialism, one, allowed them to find like-minded people, and two, just kind of really, really politicized them and gave them the impetus to act. And they were heavily influenced by the Bolshevik Revolution. And so by the time, this is 1919, right? It's only been a couple of years since the Bolshevik Revolution had occurred. And the ideas are fresh. They had similar underlying issues, and it was quote unquote successful, right? Completely changed the government based on this ideology. So they're influenced by the impact that the Bolshevik Revolution had and the fact that it was successful. And so at this time, you have the first Chinese translation of Marxist Communist Manifesto. So just as the Empress Cixi had feared the influence of these foreign ideas and the way that they can destabilize the society, this is what is coming to pass in a way. So now it's not just the people who had been educated in the West, not just the wealthy, the extreme wealthy, right? The 1% of the 1% who had access to foreign language books, but now it's becoming more available. This is still the people who can read. It's still a stratified portion of Chinese society, but the numbers are greater, enough to reach sort of critical mass. And so the Communist International was sent by the Soviet Union in 1920. And as you might remember, the purpose of the Communist International, when it was established a few years earlier, was to help develop communism in other countries, was to spread the communist way. And so Communist International is sent by the Soviet Union, and in essence, they are going to educate these budding communists on communist ideology and educate them, show them how to organize, how to get out into the community, how to recruit, etc. And of course, it provides them with clear and direct links to the Soviet Union. And we obviously, Mao became the face of communism in China. And he was a founding member. He was very young. He was a student at the time. But it was really led by these professors, Li Dazhao and Chen Duxiu. And so it's really kind of interesting because, or maybe not in the symmetry, because it was these professors who essentially founded the Communist Party, and then professors and university people are going to be heavily discriminated against and actively oppressed during Mao's rule. Once you've got the establishment of the kernel, the nucleus of the CCP, and they've got their organization efforts and everything all organized, what you have is the first united front between the CCP and the GMD. Even though they are different ideologically, in hindsight, we can see that one of the reasons why they're able to unite, of course, is because they are both seeking nationalism for China. They're both seeking to get rid of imperialists. They're both especially seeking to unite the country again during this fragmented time of warlordism. And as the following clip is going to discuss, the role that the Soviet Union played in this first united front.
Sun knew that the first thing he needed was an army to defeat the warlords and unite the country. He appealed to Western governments for money for his cause.
At the time, none of the imperialist countries wanted to help us. Only the Soviet Union wanted to help us. The Soviet Union had no friends in Asia, so they had to work with us. England and the other countries didn't want us to be united. It appeared the Soviet Union did want to help us. China had to be united, so of course we cooperated with them.
One condition of Soviet help was that the Nationalist Party allow members of the newly formed Chinese Communist Party to join. Sun agreed, and in 1924, the Soviets helped him set up a military academy just outside Canton. The Whampoa Academy quickly became a magnet for patriotic youth from all over China. Some were nationalists, some were communists, some were not affiliated with any party. They trained for a military campaign that would one day unite the country, the Northern Expedition.
In terms of this united front, it was a political necessity. Also, both the GMD and the CCP were receiving support from the Soviet Union at this point in time. But neither group was powerful enough to consolidate the whole country. They needed military forces, and they also needed help from the average people. And so that was the idea behind them uniting to work on this. And so the Soviet Union, as we said previously, organizes this alliance between the two. And I guess it wasn't well thought out, because it's not going to work out that well in the end. So the Soviet Union wants to increase her influence in China. One of the things is the Soviet Union had previously had more influence in that part, but as a result of the Russo-Japanese War, she lost outlets to like the Korean Peninsula and different parts. And as a result of World War I, and the revolution at home, she kind of had to fall back to more home. And of course, during this time, Japan goes and expands her influence within the northern parts, Manchuria, and within the German-held parts of China. So in a way, the Soviet Union is trying to regain that influence and the connections that she had in China. Keep in mind that the Soviet Union and China have this massively long border. And so she provides advisors and money to kind of get people militarily ready. But unfortunately, Sun Yat-sen dies quite early in the process. And so Chiang Kai-shek becomes the leader of the GMD. And Chiang Kai-shek was like not only was he like, but he totally was a protege of Sun Yat-sen. But there's a very big difference between the two. Sun Yat-sen was more of a statesman. He was very well educated and a lot of international experience and more of a unifier. Chiang Kai-shek has a military background. And so, I don't know, some people wonder if the results would have been different if Sun Yat-sen had lived long enough to kind of oversee this northern expedition and the rest.